All right. Good evening. There has been a lot of cancellation lately. Jack Murphy, check out his great podcast, by the way, link below, recently asked me with serious curiosity why the trolls that snap to him like a magnet are so obsessed. I had mentioned to him that they seemed to me blithely untargeted here. They seemed particularly good sport as I placed a few rather satisfying counter-arguments. Jack has recently resurfaced after some serious noise following a provocation and manufactured drama with other podcast hosts. Recently, his Twitter account, began to again broadcast interesting thoughts on Twitter, and like magic, right away you have these opportunists so eager to gain attention or blow off steam or however to provoke him, to tear him down, all the specially social cruelties most of us remember from 7th grade, and some of us used to think would have stayed there as we became adults. I was amused by the earnestly unaware absurdity of some of their attempts at creative insult, and deflecting their moderately interesting argumentative opening salvos was not so easy as shooting fish in a barrel, but each melted away after one reply. They didn't block me, and there was no bulldog level I want the last word warring, if you can believe it. I recently, without seriously trying to, provoked one non-Jack trolling guy into such a frenzy lasting for what seemed like 15 replies because he really believed that it was scientific fact that there is no such thing as dimensions beyond 3 plus time. This guy got really angry about math that he didn't know much about, and I don't know much about it, but somehow I set off this nerve in him. The anger directed against Jack isn't special. For certain people on the internet paying attention to this kind of Roosevelt Republican party flip realignment that began with Ron Paul and Dennis Kucinich accidentally agreeing and hopefully finds fulfillment with Tulsi Gabbard. Please, Tulsi. Please. Tulsi Gabbard or some such post-populist center-left turncoat snagging the Republican nomination. For people familiar with this very engaging turbulence, we have seen the cancellations, firings, and shunnings, famous and not. Some of us have lived them in one way or another. Why does it happen then? One could easily take a strident and puritanical stance and echo the letter of Paul of Tarsus to the Romans by saying, "For it is when I want to do what is good that evil is most near at hand." And on some deep level that may be especially true, as Paul himself in that same brilliant bit of philosophy wrote regarding the sin that dwells within me. There are temptations or demons within us all, and this is one reason why I feel it is not only useless but probably harmful to go around calling people evil. Evil acts exist. Evil happens. Evil, hatred, greed. These also move through us all. Let he who is without sin, etc. None of us are really above these so-called trolls or cancel mongers. We are all tempted to the same, but what is driving some of this to happen so much? And why is it focused so keenly on a certain kind of person? I think it is focused on leadership and potential leadership, and specifically that leadership which challenges abusive power. More on that point soon. So on that question of why trolls? If Jordan Peterson is to be believed, and sometimes he makes fairly profound points, this perhaps is the rerun of the Cain and Abel story, sprinkled through with Jordan's magic formula of the Pareto distribution, that broader formula being those who come up short in something like the biblical Cain resent those with success like the biblical Abel. And this is the Pareto part. Those with the most success are usually not most people. This catches some of what is going on, but besides the apparent fact that Jordan Peterson seems to miss much of the point that the Pareto distribution is a curse, or more properly a challenge, as it is a supposed blessing of surplus riches in what he naively perceives as hierarchies of meritocracy. I'll give a hint. Hierarchies are always hierarchies of merit. But the real question is, are they meritocracies truly rewarding the merits of skill and production as advertised, or do they reward other attributes, kinship, cronyism, mutual flattery, attributes rewarded that are not advertised as such? This is perhaps the definition of corruption. So Jordan demurs to flesh out a very large and very tribal part of the picture when he thinks cancel culture is about the resentful lashing out at the successful. If prominent journalists are part of a pile-on cancel mob, and they often are, what is going on here? Certainly the Peterson model of Cain-style explanation does not hold. Peterson has recently added to this cancel mythos with the model of the king who cannot abide the jester, and because he is vulnerable, corrupt, suffers from imposter syndrome, and is paranoid, will kill those who make fun of him. This is valid and important, but these Jungian archetypal rabbit holes are applying a top-down prefab explanation to our problem. I like to often work from the bottom up and look at the forces at play themselves. Who is being cancelled with the most extreme zeal? It is figures of a counterculture, or countercultures. Now, get past all thought of hippies. That was a counterculture, but one so influential that even historians have called it the counterculture. There is always a yin and yang style undercurrent to a dominant culture, but when a culture has become extremely dominant and goes past the sell-by date to crack from challenges that it has refused to adapt new energy into fighting, the counterculture becomes particularly prominent and potentially helpful. In situations historically like Germans to Rome, the Medes to Assyria, the Turks to Byzantium, or the Afghans to the Soviets. An old ruling order in collapse will be replaced by the prior counterculture. This is the dialectical pattern that Marx, to begin with, got drunk on, but sometimes, like with the Germans or the Turks, this counterculture wants to become the older order. It never can be. And sometimes, like Afghanistan, it wants to destroy the old order. Despite what many say, the US and the West are not in collapse. Yet. But like a pissed-off 12-year-old who stole his father's lighter fluid, we keep giggling closer and closer and closer, intoxicated by just how much we can get away with. And this is as true of Antifa as it is of Justin Trudeau and Fauci. The nihilism does not discriminate. So, in this turbulent amniotic environment where it is clear that new order is being formed, there is a kind of social arms race to decide who gets the power and who shapes what, as new culture forms are born, is formed and grows. So, leaders who rise up from the ranks on merit without prior blessing of an old fossilized order, and a truly fossilized old order is always as petrified of talented youth as the patricidal Saturn was of his own son Zeus. This young blood is sent to the wilderness, and if they don't stay quiet, and especially if they appear to have success, they are torn down. And a truly magnificent old order will never dirty hands by doing it themselves. We have human psychology to thank for that. The loyalty of the abused to the abuser is at play here. Someone in pain, who has been hurt by authority but still feels they have something to lose. If that mercurial authority becomes angry, will viciously lash out at people who appear to be not under the control of this authority, especially when those freelancers challenge the authority with apparent success. The lowly who want to rise then hope to gain attention from the authority, approval, or at least prevent beatings by kicking the new guy. This plebeian destruction of challenges to abusive authority is, I believe, the root cause of the specific trollery that is attracted to people like Joe Rogan, Lauren Southern, Jack Murphy, Libby Emmons, take your pick. And it has deep recent roots. I remember this same kind, smaller scale, same kind of lash-out instinct way back in the 90s when just for using a Macintosh or publicly liking one, you would get called all kinds of names. Lies would be spread about the technology. You were forbidden by teachers or employers, if you were older, to use a Mac. And you heard over and over and over again how brilliant Bill Gates was, that Windows was better because it sold so well, proven so, and that no one could defeat Microsoft in the American and global free market. And by the way, a year after Windows 95, and this is a coincidence, but it's meaningful, Clinton had just opened up, 1996, the granted most favored trade nation status to China. And it was going to be only a few years, they said, only a few years until efficient market capitalism made them all democratic, just like it happened in Russia and Poland. Empires end. Empires of all sizes and kinds. So now, this is where many people would end an essay, end with the main question, not so with me. So, what do we do about this? In one sense, never strangle a drowning enemy. Also, realize that to make rivals is more fun and more useful than to make enemies. To Rome, Carthage was ever the whetstone of their greatness. To split our country would be to make certain that none of us win. But that is all very abstract. Back to the point of Jordan Peterson's meritocratic Canadian naivete. I'm from Wisconsin, lived 7 happy years in Chicago, so my own heavily burned over Midwestern naivete gives me some sympathy to Jordan's blind spot. We should never, ever, as some of the culturally suicidal left is doing, never abandon or malign meritocracy. It must be nurtured and kept strong. It is very easy, also, to fool ourselves into thinking that we have meritocracy when we don't especially, or thinking that we are not really making exceptions to meritocracy, like a daughter producing her father's podcast and voicing all of Dad's commercial voiceovers. But hierarchy by merit is the ever-renewing ideal to strive for. I think Jack probably has something like this in mind with the liminal order, though I think it may be susceptible to a convivial, fraternal tribalism of sorts, but what isn't susceptible to that? I really don't know much about his organization, but the efforts are made, efforts must be made, that the political Machiavellian scheming that pretends to be justice, when really it is a desperate act of those who fear for their own survival. It is important that confident compassion and occasional sharp boundaries drawn by sporting against the trolls. All this is how we might build a better world for the grandkids. The ones who don't exist, but for whom we always work and hope. Thank you for listening.